Harper McCall stood under the blinding glare of the town hall spotlights, her breath rattling in her chest as the crowd's pitying whispers swelled like a tide. Across the stage, her husband Silas adjusted the microphone with a steady, practiced hand, his voice thick with rehearsed grief as he announced her total mental collapse to the cameras. Harper reached into her pocket for the flash drive, the only thing that could prove he was poisoning her and embezzling the town's funds. But as her fingers closed around the cold metal, her heart stopped. The drive was empty. Silas had swapped it during their struggle in the darkened hallway, leaving her standing defenseless before the very people he was robbing. As security guards moved in to seize her arms, Harper didn't scream or struggle. Instead, she leaned into the microphone, the scent of industrial disinfectant still sharp on her skin from the man she'd had to fight to get here. She didn't plead for her sanity. She began to recite a precise, clinical list of chemical compounds, the exact sedatives Silas had been slipping into her food. The room went deathly silent as Silas's face transformed from a grieving husband into something predatory. The central question hung in the air. How could a woman supposedly lost to dementia know the exact chemical signature of the crime being committed against her? The fluorescent lights in the school lab buzzed like a swarm of trapped insects, their flicker casting jagged shadows across the stainless steel counter. Harper McCall's fingers trembled as she adjusted the pipette, the plastic tip clicking against the glass vial. The blood inside, dark, almost black under the harsh light, swirled like ink in water. She had drawn it herself an hour earlier, the needle biting into her vein with a sharp, clean pain that made her teeth clench. This was her rebellion, a quiet mutiny against the digital ghosts haunting her life. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from the medical portal. Your latest cognitive assessment results are ready. Click to view. She ignored it. The lab's computer screen glowed with the raw data from her independent test. Numbers, graphs, the unfiltered truth. Nothing like the sanitized reports the portal spat out, the ones claiming her memory was within normal limits, while her own notes proved otherwise. Or rather, the ones Silas insisted she read, which claimed she was slipping into the fog of early-onset dementia. The discrepancy was a physical weight in the room. On the screen, her markers were perfect. Her white blood cell count, her glucose, her neurological indicators, all steady. But the online portal, the one Silas helped her manage, showed a terrifying descent. It showed plaques that didn't exist and protein levels that were pure fiction. The blood work in her hand was a physical testament to her sanity, a jagged piece of reality that refused to fit into the narrative Silas was weaving around her like a shroud. She leaned back, the stool creaking under her. The lab smelled of antiseptic and something older, something sour beneath the bleach. A forgotten petri dish, maybe, or the lingering stench of last week's failed experiments. She exhaled through her nose, the air warm against her upper lip, and stared at the printout. It was clean. She was clean. The suspicion that had been a dull ache in her chest for months sharpened into a needlepoint of certainty. The portal wasn't malfunctioning. It was being manipulated. The door creaked, the sound echoing through the science wing like a gunshot. Harper stiffened, her pulse jumping. She instinctively moved to cover the printout with a stray textbook. You're still here? It wasn't the janitor this time. Coach Miller stood in the doorway, his Oakhaven windbreaker rustling. He looked older under these lights, the leathery skin of his face folding into deeper shadows. He held a hand to his side, his gnarled fingers clutching a stained towel. Need some gauze. Scraped my arm on the equipment in the shed. Harper forced her breathing to steady. Of course, Coach. Over here. As she moved toward the first aid cabinet, she felt his eyes on her. They weren't the usual friendly eyes of a colleague who had known her since she was a student. They were narrow, flickering with a mixture of pity and unease. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her hands, watching for the tremor Silas told everyone she had. Silas mentioned you've been staying late a lot, Miller said, his voice a low rumble that lacked its usual authority. Said the doctor wanted you to get plenty of rest. Stress isn't good for for what you're dealing with. The air in the lab suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Silas had been busy. He wasn't just whispering in the dark of their bedroom. He was poisoning the very ground she walked on. He was building a cage of concerned neighbors and colleagues, ensuring that when she finally screamed, everyone would only see a woman lost in the fog of her own mind. "I'm fine, Miller," she said, her voice sounding brittle even to her own ears. She handed him the gauze, her fingers brushing his. He flinched, just a fraction, as if her illness might be contagious. "Just finishing up some inventory." "Right. Inventory," he muttered, backing away toward the door. He didn't offer the usual joke about the football team's chances. He just turned and vanished into the darkness of the hallway, leaving Harper alone with the humming machines and the evidence of her husband's betrayal. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Silas wasn't just watching her. He was intercepting her. Every time she logged into the medical portal, she wasn't seeing the hospital's server. She was seeing a mirror, a curated lie designed to break her spirit. He had injected false diagnoses into her digital life, turning her own health against her. It was a targeted technological attack, a surgical strike on her identity. She turned back to the computer, her fingers flying over the keys. She needed to see the trail. She was a nurse, not a hacker. But she knew the school's network had a back door, an old health system log that predated the fancy new portal. If she could find the raw data before it was cleaned for the user interface, she could prove it. The screen flickered. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the lab door. Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't Hayes the janitor, and it wasn't Miller. The silhouette was too tall, too still. The door opened slowly. A man in a crisp, dark uniform stepped inside. He wore a badge she didn't recognize. Private security, not the usual school resource officers. He was young, with pale, watery blue eyes that scanned the room with a practiced, cold efficiency. "Mrs. McCall?" His voice was clipped, official. "The board has requested I escort you from the building. There have been reports of erratic behavior. After-hours access is being restricted for certain staff members for their own safety." Harper felt the walls closing in. "I'm the school nurse. I have 24-hour access for emergencies. Who are you?" "Derek, with Oakhaven Security," he said, stepping further into the room. His hand rested near his belt. "Silas McCall, your husband, expressed concern to the principal. He's worried you're having an episode. I'm here to make sure you get home safely." The unstable nurse? The concerned husband. The trap was springing. This wasn't just a professional threat. It was the beginning of her legal erasure. If she left now, if she let this man take her, she was admitting her own helplessness. "I'm just packing my things," Harper said, her voice low and measured. She reached for her bag, her fingers curling around the strap. Inside was the printout, the evidence. "I'll need to take that bag, ma'am," Derek said, his voice hardening. He moved with a sudden, predatory speed, closing the distance between them. "Standard procedure. We can't have you taking any sensitive materials while you're in this state. It's my personal property," Harper snapped, pulling the bag back. He didn't argue. He reached out and grabbed the strap, his bony fingers digging into the leather. Harper felt a surge of adrenaline, a raw, primal heat that burned away the fear. She wasn't the quiet nurse anymore. She was a woman fighting for her life. They struggled in the narrow aisle between the lab benches. The security guard was taller, stronger, but Harper had the advantage of desperation. He yanked the bag, nearly pulling her off her feet, but she twisted, her heels scuffing against the linoleum. A tray of glass beakers shattered on the floor, the sound like a punctuating scream in the silence of the wing. "Let go," she hissed, her knuckles turning white. Derek's face twisted into a mask of frustration. He wasn't a hero. He was a pawn. A man who had frozen in a mall shooting years ago and was now trying to prove his worth by bullying a woman half his size. He shoved her back against the lockers, the metal clanging with a hollow, jarring thud. Harper's hand landed on something heavy on the counter. A thick, leather-bound medical reference book. Without thinking, she swung it. The corner of the book caught him square in the temple. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was enough. Derek's eyes rolled back for a second, his grip loosening. He groaned, slumping against the bench, his hand going to his head. Harper didn't wait. She grabbed her bag and bolted. She sprinted down the hallway, her footsteps echoing like rapid-fire pulse beats. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to chase her, their hum growing into a roar in her ears. She burst through the heavy double doors into the night air, the Oklahoma heat hitting her like a wall. The parking lot was a vast, cracked expanse of asphalt, lit by the sickly yellow glow of sodium vapor lamps. Her sedan sat alone near the staff entrance, a dark blue island in the sea of shadows. She fumbled with her keys, the jingle sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Behind her, the school door flung open. Derek was stumbling out, his face pale, his radio crackling with static. "Stop, McCall, stop!" She dived into the driver's seat, slamming the lock down just as his hand hit the glass. She cranked the engine. It sputtered, a momentary hesitation that made her heart stop before roaring to life. She threw it into reverse, tires screeching as she peeled away, leaving the guard standing in a cloud of exhaust and dust. She was a fugitive now, a nurse who had assaulted a security guard. But she had the evidence. She drove until the school was a distant speck in her rearview mirror, pulling into the darkened lot of a 24-hour diner 3 towns over. She needed to move fast. Silas would have the police looking for her car within the hour. She pulled out her laptop and a small, nondescript flash drive. She had one more card to play. Before she had left the lab, she'd initiated a remote download using a secret access code she'd been given months ago by the IT administrator, a quiet man who usually hid in the basement and fixed Wi-Fi routers. She watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 15%, 40%, 85%. The logs were raw, unfiltered. They showed every login, every modification, every IP address that had touched her medical records. And there it was, a series of entries from a residential IP, her own home. Silas had been logging in as her administrator, rewriting her history from the comfort of their living room. But as she scrolled deeper into the system metadata, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The access code she had used, the one that allowed her to bypass the portal's encryption, wasn't a generic admin bypass. It was a personal key. She looked at the name attached to the key's creation. Julian McCall, Silas's brother, the IT guy she had barely spoken to in 3 years. The man Silas always described as the failure, the weak link in the family. Her phone buzzed. Not a notification this time, but a text from an unknown number. "I saw you in the logs. Don't go home, Harper. He's already changed the locks. She stared at the screen, her breath hitching. She called the number. It picked up on the first ring. Julian? She whispered. He did it to Mom. The voice on the other end was a frantic rush of words, quiet and trembling. 20 years ago. He convinced the state she had early onset Alzheimer's so he could take the house and the insurance money. I was too young to stop him. I thought he'd changed. But I saw what he was doing to your portal. Harper closed her eyes, the horror of it washing over her. This wasn't a new game. This was Silas's masterpiece, a recurring nightmare he performed on the women who loved him. Why are you helping me now? She asked. Because you're not like her, Julian said, his voice cracking. You fight back. And because if I don't help you, I'm just as guilty as he is. Get out of the car, Harper. He has a GPS tracker on the bumper. Run. The line went dead. Harper didn't hesitate. She grabbed her bag in the flash drive, abandoning her car in the diner lot. She vanished into the shadows of the Tulsa night, the air finally feeling cool against her skin, fueled by a rage that was far more powerful than any fear. The next morning, the world felt smaller, tighter. Harper sat in the back of a dusty library in a neighboring county, staring at her phone. Or rather, the dark, lifeless slab of glass that used to be her phone. Silas had moved faster than she anticipated. He hadn't just changed the locks. He had wiped her digital existence. Her smartphone was bricked, a remote kill command issued through their shared family account. When she tried to use her credit card at a gas station for a bottle of water, the machine spat it back out with a cold, red declined. She was financially and technologically erased. She was a ghost in a scrub suit, sitting among rows of books she couldn't afford to borrow. She had to get to the clinic. The Oakhaven Health Clinic was the only place where the physical paper backups of her medical history might still exist, the ones Silas couldn't reach with a keyboard. But she was 40 miles away, and her car was a beacon for the police. She hitched a ride with a delivery driver, a silent man who didn't ask why a woman in wrinkled scrubs was traveling toward Oakhaven at dawn. When he dropped her off a mile from her house, the sun was beginning to bake the Oklahoma red dirt, the heat shimmering off the pavement. She approached her home from the back, through the dense line of trees that separated her property from the neighbors. She needed her spare keys. She needed her hidden notebook, the one where she'd been logging her symptoms and her suspicions for weeks. As she crept toward the garage, she saw it. Her sedan, the one she'd left at the diner, was parked in the driveway. Silas must have had it towed back. But as she got closer, she saw the jagged ruins of her tires. All four had been slashed, the rubber gaping like open wounds. It wasn't a message. It was a tether. He wanted her here. He wanted her trapped. She slipped through the back door, which she was surprised to find unlocked. The house was unnaturally quiet. The scent of lemon pledge was overwhelming, a sterile mask for the rot underneath. She went straight to the kitchen, reaching into the large ceramic flour jar where she'd tucked her notebook. Her hand met only powder. She whirled around. The notebook was sitting in the exact center of the dining table. Open. Harper's skin crawled. She looked up at the corners of the ceiling, noticing for the first time the tiny, black domes of hidden cameras tucked into the molding. Silas wasn't just waiting for her. He was watching her play her part in his script. Suddenly, the house groaned. The heavy electronic bolts of the front and back doors slid home with a synchronized, metallic thud. She ran to the window, pulling back the curtain. The smart locks were cycling. Red light, green light, red light. The house was breathing, controlled by a man who wasn't even in the room. It was a psychological prison, a high-tech cage designed to remind her that her environment was no longer her own. "Harper, is that you, dear?" The voice didn't come from Silas. It came from the garage. She moved toward the internal door, her heart hammering. Standing in the middle of the concrete floor was a man she recognized. Silas's assistant from the insurance agency. A man with a face like a broken stone and knuckles that stayed permanently bruised. "Silas is very worried," the assistant said, his voice a low, threatening growl. He held a clipboard in one hand and a set of heavy-duty plastic restraints in the other. "He's arranged for a voluntary psychiatric evaluation. There's a car waiting. We're going to get you the help you need, Harper. No more running." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Harper said, her voice steadying as she backed toward the workbench. "I wasn't asking," the assistant said, stepping forward. He moved with a heavy, deliberate gait, his shadow stretching across the garage floor like a shroud. Harper's hand landed on a large, industrial-sized bottle of disinfectant she'd used for cleaning the garage floor. It had a high-pressure spray nozzle. As the assistant lunged for her, his thick fingers reaching for her throat, Harper squeezed the trigger. A jet of stinging, chemical-heavy liquid caught him square in the eyes. He let out a strangled cry, his hands flying to his face. He stumbled back, his boots slipping on the slick concrete. "You bitch!" he roared, swinging blindly. Harper didn't stop. She grabbed a heavy iron tire iron from the wall rack. As he tried to grab her arm, she swung it with every ounce of fury she'd been suppressed for years. The iron connected with his forearm with a sickening crack. He howled, his grip breaking instantly. Harper didn't look back. She dived through the side door of the garage, the one that led toward the backyard. She didn't head for the street. She knew Silas would have the front monitored. Instead, she sprinted for the woods. The gnarled branches of the oaks and elms tore at her scrubs, thorns catching on her skin. But she didn't feel the pain. She ran until her lungs burned, until the sound of the assistant's shouting faded into the rustle of the leaves. She reached the edge of a secluded creek, the water trickling over mossy stones. She collapsed against a rotting stump, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She needed to think. She needed to be the nurse. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small orange pill bottle Silas had insisted she take every morning for her anxiety. She'd been dutiful, trusting him, even as her head felt like it was filled with cotton. She poured a pill into her palm. It was a small, blue tablet with no markings. She knew her pharmacology. This wasn't Lexapro. It wasn't even a standard sedative. She touched it to her tongue, tasting the bitter, metallic tang she'd grown used to. Her mind raced through the database of her training. The dizzy spells, the confusion, the way her fine motor skills had begun to fail. It wasn't dementia. It wasn't even stress. It was a high-dose sedative, a heavy-duty tranquilizer usually reserved for severe manic episodes in institutionalized patients. Silas wasn't just gaslighting her. He was chemically lobotomizing her. He was poisoning her, one morning coffee at a time. The rage that hit her then was cold and sharp. It was a clinical, focused anger. She wasn't a victim of a failing mind. She was the survivor of an attempted murder. She pocketed the remaining pills, her physical evidence. She looked toward the horizon, where the spire of the Oak Haven Town Hall was visible through the trees. The meeting on school safety was tonight. Silas would be there, the golden boy, the concerned husband. She stood up, wiping the blood from a thorn scratch on her cheek. She began her trek through the forest, a ghost coming back to haunt the man who thought he'd already buried her. The town hall loomed like a fortress in the twilight. Silas had been thorough. The parking lot was swarming with local police and the same private security guards Harper had encountered at the school. He'd painted her as a dangerous, mentally unstable fugitive, a woman who had snapped and assaulted an officer. Every entrance was a trap. She circled the perimeter, keeping to the shadows of the gymnasium's brick walls. She needed an ally. Harper? The whisper came from a darkened service alcove near the loading docks. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out. Leo Thorne, the head of school security. He was an old family friend, a man who had coached her son in Little League before the accident. "Leo," she breathed, moving toward him. "Thank God." Leo's face was a mask of conflict. He held his radio tight, the static a low hiss between them. "Harper, you shouldn't be here. Silas, he's got the whole board convinced. He filed emergency guardianship papers this afternoon. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, you're a ward of the state. He's going to put you in that facility in Tulsa, Harper, the high-security one." "He's poisoning me, Leo," she said, her voice low and urgent. She held out the blue pills. "Look at these. He's been dosing me with sedatives to mimic dementia. I have the server logs that prove he hacked my medical portal." Leo looked at the pills, then back at the gym doors. "The logs? Do you have them?" "On a flash drive," she said, patting her pocket. "I just need to get to the podium. I need the town to see." Leo hesitated, his gaze flickering to the police cruisers. "He's my boss's boss, Harper. If I let you in..." "He's a monster, Leo. You know me. You know I'm not crazy." Leo closed his eyes for a second, then nodded. He pulled a heavy ring of keys from his belt. "The service entrance behind the stage. The code is 44 Ningdegu. But Harper, be careful. He's not alone in there." She slipped through the door, the cool, stale air of the school basement hitting her. She moved through the darkened service hallways, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She could hear the muffled roar of the crowd in the gymnasium above, the murmurs of her neighbors, the people she'd cared for, all gathered to hear Silas speak. She reached the stairs leading to the backstage area. The shadows were deep here, the only light coming from the red exit sign above the door. A hand shot out of the darkness, grabbing her throat. She was slammed back against the cold metal lockers, the air leaving her lungs in a painful wheeze. Silas stood over her, his face a mask of cold, calculated fury. He wasn't the polished councilman now. He was the predator she'd seen in her nightmares. "I knew you'd come here," he hissed, his fingers digging into her skin. "You always were predictable, Harper. Always trying to be the hero. Give me the drive." "No," she gasped, clawing at his hand. "I saw Leo on the cameras," Silas said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm baritone. "He's already been dealt with. You have nothing, Harper. No car, no money, no phone. And in 10 hours, you won't even have a name. Give it to me, or I'll make sure the evaluation is a lot more painful than it needs to be." He pinned her with his weight, his free hand reaching for her pocket. He was too strong, his physical presence overwhelming her. He found the drive, his fingers curling around it with a triumphant grin. "You lose," he whispered. Harper felt the raw, jagged edge of her survival instinct flare. As he leaned in, his face inches from hers, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She bit him. She sank her teeth into the fleshy part of his hand with every ounce of strength she had. Silas let out a guttural, animalistic roar, his grip loosening as he recoiled in shock and pain. Harper didn't wait. She lunged past him, her feet flying over the concrete. She burst through the stage curtains, the sudden glare of the gymnasium lights blinding her. The room went silent. Hundreds of faces, neighbors, friends, enemies, all turned toward the bedraggled woman in torn scrubs standing on the stage. Silas stumbled out behind her, his hand bleeding, his face contorted. He immediately smoothed his features, his concerned husband mask sliding back into place with terrifying speed. "Harper!" he cried out, his voice thick with performative grief. "Thank God you're safe. Please, everyone, stay back. She's having a severe dissociative episode. She's dangerous to herself." Harper ran to the podium, her fingers trembling as she grabbed the laptop's USB cable. She shoved the drive in, her eyes fixed on the projector screen. "Look at the files," she screamed at the crowd. "Look at what he did." She clicked the folder, empty. The drive was blank. Silas walked toward her, a slow, confident stride. He leaned into the microphone, his voice echoing through the gym. "She's been hallucinating for weeks, poor thing. She thinks she's found a conspiracy. She's been carrying around a blank plastic stick, telling me it's the truth." He reached her, his hand coming down on her shoulder like a vice. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear, whispering so only she could hear. "I swapped it in the hallway, you stupid bitch. I've always been 3 steps ahead of you." Harper stood frozen in the spotlight. The crowd was murmuring now, a sea of pity and judgment. She looked at the empty screen, then at the man who had stolen her life. She was at rock bottom. She had no evidence, no allies, no voice. And then she looked at Silas's hand, the one she'd bitten. She smelled it, the bitter almond scent, the same scent as the pills. He hadn't just been dosing her. He'd been handling the raw powder. It was on his skin. It was on his breath. She didn't need a flash drive. She was a nurse. She leaned into the microphone, her voice shaking but growing stronger with every word. "He's right," she said, the crowd falling silent. "I have been confused. I have been losing my memory. And for a long time, I believed him. I believed I was dying." Silas smiled, a small, triumphant curl of his lips. "It's okay, Harper. We're going to get you help." "But then I remembered my training," Harper continued, her eyes locking onto a man in the 3rd row, Dr. Eris, the town's most respected physician. "I remembered that early-onset dementia doesn't cause acute ataxia. It doesn't cause the specific pupillary dilation I've been experiencing every morning after my anxiety medication." Silas's smile faltered. He tried to pull her away from the mic, but she stepped back, her voice rising to a command. "The medication Silas has been giving me is a high-dose sedative called phenobarbital. It's bitter. It smells like almonds when it's metabolized. And if you look at his hand, the one I just bit, you'll find the residue. He's been crushing it into my coffee for months." Dr. Aris stood up, his brow furrowed. "Harper, that's a serious accusation." "Check his pockets," she shouted, pointing at Silas. "Check the insurance accounts. He didn't just want me gone because he's a monster. He wanted me gone because I'm the only one who noticed the discrepancies in the school's insurance pool. He's been embezzling from the town's funds, and he used my illness as a cover for the missing money he blamed on my erratic spending." She began to recite numbers, dates, amounts, account codes she'd memorized from the files Julian had shown her. "Account 8804, the Municipal Bond Fund. He moved $60,000 on June 12th. He used my login to do it." The town treasurer, a hawk-faced woman in the front row, gasped. She pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying. Silas's face went from pale to a terrifying mottled purple. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. "Shut up!" he screamed, lunging for her. "You crazy bitch, shut up!" He swung a fist, the blow catching Harper on the shoulder, sending her sprawling across the stage. The crowd erupted. This wasn't a grieving husband. This was a man possessed by a raw, violent hatred. The security guards, the ones he'd hired, hesitated. They saw the rage. They saw the blood on his lip. And they saw the treasurer's face as she looked up from her tablet, her eyes wide with horror. The numbers match. The treasurer whispered into the silence. The accounts. They're empty. Silas didn't care about the money anymore. He lunged at Harper again, his fingers reaching for her throat. But Harper was faster. She grabbed the heavy metal microphone stand and swung it with a clinical precision. It caught him in the shins, sending him crashing to the wooden floor. Before he could get up, Leo Thorne was there. He dived onto Silas's back, pinning him down. "Enough, Silas!" Leo roared. Leo reached into Silas's jacket pocket and pulled out a small, silver object. He held it up for the crowd to see. The real flash drive. "I saw him swap it," Leo said, his voice thick with shame. "I was afraid. But I'm not afraid anymore." The police moved in then, the handcuffs clicking shut with a finality that felt like the first breath of fresh air Harper had taken in years. As they led Silas away, he turned back, his eyes flat and dead. "You're nothing without me, Harper. You're still just a failure's daughter." Harper didn't flinch. She stood at the podium, her scrubs torn, her face bruised, but her eyes clear. "No, Silas," she said, her voice carrying through the quiet gym. "I'm the nurse, and I just finished the exam." An hour later, the gymnasium was empty. The flickering lights finally turned off. Harper sat on the edge of the stage, a detective taking her statement. She looked out at the rows of empty chairs. The town would be different now. The secrets were out. The rot had been excised. She walked out into the Tulsa night, the air cool and smelling of rain. She didn't have a car. She didn't have a phone. But as she walked toward the lights of the city, she realized she had something far more important. She had herself. She returned to the clinic the next morning. Not as a patient, but as the woman in charge. She sat at her desk, the morning sun streaming through the window, and began the long process of rebuilding her life. She picked up a pen, her hand steady, and wrote the first entry in her new log. Patient, Harper McCall. Status, recovered.